$500 billion into the IMF. That's on top of $250 billion at the moment. So the resources of the IMF will go up to something like $750 billion, a massive increase in their ability to bail out countries that get into trouble, to prevent, for example, a crisis in one country becoming so severe that it affects banks all over the world and ripples through to other banks. It's a bit like giving a bit more power to international rescue, if you see what I mean.
Robert, thanks very much indeed. So there you go. That's the work cut out for them this afternoon. Right now, let's take you to what they think they have achieved this morning. Keep him.
This is a day when global power could be rebalanced. 20 leaders now, with the responsibility to show they're united on rewriting how the world manages its money. A new world order with new big hitters. Brazil, the heavyweight of Latin America. India.
Well, unfortunately, we've lost that report from Hugh Pym, but Hugh was setting out a little bit of what they hope to achieve, and as we've heard already, there are some big moves. Well, a little earlier, I spoke to the Chancellor, Alistair Darling, and asked him what he thought had been achieved so far.
Yes, I think it does, and it's interesting that I think, countries recognise the huge dangers of what's been happening, and therefore we need to stop it. Now, we are in the middle of discussing that just now, but there's a very clear indication from countries that they know that if we repeat the mistakes of the 1930s when people put up barriers to trade, it meant that the recession lasted for years. We can't allow that to happen again, but it does mean that we've got to be ready to take action wherever we see protectionism.
OK, and if you're taking action, and the French say they would like to move a car company from a factory in Slovenia back to Paris to create 400 jobs, what do you do then?
I think the World Trade Organization, which is one of the organizations charged with making sure that we have proper open trade, I think that's got to have a greater role so that if something does happen, there's an international, if you like, slightly independent forum in order to draw attention to that, and we can then take action. And they could stop that? Well, we need to make sure that we have an agreement whereby if something is happening, then we can take action. But I think the bigger thing is to get a commitment for countries to think very hard when they introduce measures to support their own economies what the consequences might be, because there is a very real concern, especially amongst the emerging and developing economies, that resources will be sucked out of those countries into the richer countries, and that's something we've got to stop, because at the end of the day that will make every one of us poorer.
Talk to us a little bit about regulation. We heard very strident tones yesterday from the French and the Germans in their news conference, suggesting their way.
Arrests taken place this morning. This is Ramparts. This is a community and social centre. There's a library and a group of people who live here. And this really was the focus of one of those raids, the other one in Earl Street in East London, not too far away from here, in both locations around a mile or so away from the Bank of England, where we saw the demonstrations yesterday. Let's have a word with one of the guys who was in here when the raids took place earlier. Can you, perhaps Matt, if you on the camera, if you could come a bit closer to where we are, could you explain to us what happened yesterday, this morning when the police came in, and what was it like here?
Yeah, basically we just saw police come here, converging here, more and more vans, more and more officers. We were just wondering what it was all about. We were looking outside of the window to see what was going on. And then at some point we just saw like them bringing ropes and other material, basically to raid the place. And we were a bit shocked because we weren't expecting it at all. And then at some point we heard some noises from the roofs, and we say, guys, if you want to enter, just knock the door, and if you want to enter, we'll let you in. They smashed the door, went down there. We were then at the point saying, okay, let's keep quiet, let's have a coffee. They smashed the door in the room where we were. I got punched in the face, people got thrown on their seats, we got handcuffed. It's completely ridiculous, and with taser guns pointed at us, as we were terrorists. This is completely ridiculous. I mean, this just shows how much Metropolitan Police wants, to what extent it wants to really facilitate peaceful protest.
We've seen about 20 or so people led away in handcuffs. You were on the march yesterday. There were quite a few people who were here who have been on that march yesterday. There were violent scenes, but the majority of protesters, as we saw yesterday, were peaceful. What is your reaction to them being taken away in connection with violent disorder yesterday?
For me, this is just scapegoating, just framing few people because they didn't manage to get those people, so they go randomly for people to get them. This is really ridiculous. I mean, shame on Jackie Smith, shame on Paul Stephenson. Is this the way to facilitate peaceful protest?
But there were very ugly scenes. There was a lot of violence directed towards the police yesterday.
Yeah, so
they have to investigate that, don't they?
So what's the point? Do they have to beat people up because there were some problems yesterday, randomly like that? This is just really ridiculous. I mean, this is a right, people right to meet, people right to socially and politically organize, which has been eroded and which has been attacked in this case in a shameful way. I'm scared by police state rehearsal here.
Were any of the people who were taken away today involved in the violence against the police, involved in the windows being smashed at the branch of the Bank of Scotland?
I'm sure they weren't. You know, 99% of the people yesterday didn't do anything. They just went randomly for the place that was a bit more public, because we are a public place, we have nothing to hide. We had media coming here, we said we would organize peaceful protests since the very beginning. We went there with a very fluffy demonstration with pillows, say right to housing for all of us. So they just went for us because we are the only public place here. We are one of the few public places. And this is just ridiculous, attacking places of gathering, places where people sleep, to express their right to protest like that.
OK, so many thanks for joining us on Sky News. That is the picture that 20 or so people have been taken away from this, what the Metropolitan Police call a squat, and they are now being questioned in connection with that violent disorder. Around 60 or so have been taken from another similar premises not too far away from here in East London. They're now being questioned. The police say that they will be released if they're not of interest to them, but equally, if they were part of that violence yesterday and that can be proved, then they will be charged with offences connected to the violence that we saw yesterday.
All right, Tom Parmenter, thanks very much for that. A protester died during the demonstrations last night. To mark the tragedy, a slow march was held from Bishopsgate to the Bank of England. Sky's Emma Birchley is there. Hi, Emma. Tell us about the groups involved, what they want to achieve by this march today.
Well, they're calling themselves Solidarity Against Police Repression. They arrived here around 1 o'clock. And they say that they're very angry about the way that the demonstration was dealt with yesterday. We know that around this area, the roads leading to the Bank of England and the Royal Exchange there were cordoned off by various police lines. And people were allowed into that area, but they weren't allowed out. Now, that's a procedure which is called kettling. And it's a way of doing things that the protesters say is unfair. People were left there for 6.5 hours, they say, without access to toilets or to water. So they're protesting about that, but they're also protesting about the death of one of the demonstrators yesterday. Real conflicting stories about that coming through. We're told from the police that he collapsed and attempts were made to resuscitate him. An ambulance then took him around 7:30 last night to hospital, where he was pronounced dead. And we're told by police that actually missiles were thrown by some of the protesters while attempts were made to resuscitate him. On the other hand, 3 of the protesters today who said they didn't want to be on camera told us how they were actually with this man outside the police cordon. They were being chased by police with dogs. The man tripped, banged his head and later died. So real conflicting stories about what happened there. Earlier, I spoke to a lady from G20 Meltdown. Her name is Marina Pepper, and she spoke about her anger about the way the protest was dealt with.
The only information that the police have provided is that a man died yesterday whilst inside a police cordon. We've been provided with no other information. The police detained people here for a very long time yesterday under very unsafe conditions and showed a lot of violence towards the protesters. And we believe that the police have responsibility to the people that they detained to provide them with proper health services that this man, we want to find out whether he was looked after properly, and we're not given that information at the moment. So we're calling on the protesters who were here yesterday to tell us if they saw anything and to provide a statement to Bindman solicitors. And we're calling on the public to provide an independent public inquiry into what happens.
OK, Emma Birchley, live for us there at the Bank of England. Thanks, Emma. Well, let's return to the politics, the diplomacy of the G20 summit. With me now, the Foreign Affairs editor, Tim Marshall. Tim, I'm sure we'll have agreement across the board and success, words of success from many of the leaders. But what's interested me, in particularly this afternoon, has been the posturing, the positioning of the leaders, and particularly in the photos earlier, and who they want to be with.
They've all got their own domestic media here taking photographs of them, and they all want a photograph taken next to one particular person. And it's not the Prime Minister of the Netherlands.
Or
It's
Great
someone
Britain.
else. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, you're right. Or Great Britain. It's one man, and we're going to see him now, I think.
This,